Hey there, OpenShift fans. I want to take a couple of minutes here and show you a new capability in OpenShift 4.20 that I am particularly excited about and has a lot of relevance to OpenShift Dev Spaces. For a long time, one of the missing features in Dev Spaces has been the ability to enable a full container runtime without having to relax the security constraints that come out of the box with OpenShift. In OpenShift 4.20, it is now possible. There's a new capability enabled at the kernel level on the nodes called user namespaces that, combined with some new features built into OpenShift 4.20 and some new security capabilities, will enable dev spaces to give developers a full container runtime inside of their cloud IDE. I'm going to show that to you real quick. You see I've got a workspace up and running right now. It has been enabled with this new capability. And really the only thing I had to do, and you won't have to do this in the next release or so of Dev Spaces, but for now, you just have to add a new security context constraint to your Che cluster custom resource that will enable this user namespaces feature. And I have done that. I'll include the repository where this came from in the link for this video so that you can see it for yourself. Suffice it to say, if I open this README right here, you'll get a quick preview. There's the security context constraint. The important thing here, and the difference between the security context constraint that you already have in your Dev Spaces instance, which enabled you to do podman build, podman pull, podman push, but not podman run. The difference here is this new thing here. User namespace level, requiring pod level, allows on the host node, your container that's running your workspace, or the pod that's running the containers of your workspace rather, to be mapped into its own UID GID space. The other benefit of that is that inside of your workspace, you can actually be running now as a known user ID. In this case, the way I've set this up, it's going to be UID 1000. So if I open a terminal here real quick, I'll prove to you that I'm not blowing smoke. I am UID 1000, GID 1000, and I belong to groups 1000 and 0. But I'll show you here in just a minute why that's not a concern on the underlying host node where my workspace is running. Before I do that though, let's go ahead and pull a container image. This is the libpod banner. It is a very simple container, runs an Nginx server that just serves up a podman banner. And let's do that now. Let's run it. Oops, I misclicked there. So let's do that again. All right, not a lot of excitement. It ran, no errors. You see, the workspace identified that now I have a process listening on port 8080 that I didn't previously, and since I don't have it mapped to a route, it's asking me if I want to open it. And I'm going to say sure. And there it is. There's the very exciting podman banner being served up by the Nginx server. So let's look at what's actually going on here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to podman exec into the running container, and you'll see inside of this container, I'm actually running as root. So I'm running as root in a container that's running in my workspace container that's running on the OpenShift node. Let's look at a couple of things here. First, let's look at the process table inside of this container that's nested inside of my workspace container. And you'll see there's the Nginx process that was kicked off by root and is running as the user Nginx. Well, who is Nginx? Let's find out. Let's do a cat of Etsy password. And the Nginx user is right here, and it's UID 100. So we're running inside this container. The Nginx server is running as UID 100. Let's get out of the container. Let's look at the process table inside of my workspace. There's the Nginx process. Well, take a look at this. Inside of my workspace, it's mapped to UID 1100. So what do you suppose it is on the underlying OpenShift compute node? Now, in the bad old days, before user namespaces, I would have had to have relaxed security context constraints in my OpenShift cluster in order for this to work, and you would have seen these UIDs being mapped down onto the host node. But instead now, if we go find the pod that is running my workspace, and we identify which of my cluster nodes it's running on. It's running on node 71. Let's open a shell into that guy. So I'm going to SSH in as the core user. And let's look for that Nginx process. And there it is. But look here. It's running as a very random high UID. So in my workspace, it's running as 1100. Inside of the container in my workspace, it's running as ID 100. This is the benefits that are brought to us by user namespaces support. So now I can run a full container runtime. I can even leak devices into my environment. And you see, these are the devices that have been allowed. This dev fuse gives me the ability to use fuse overlay FS, and this dev net ton allows me to have rootless podman networking. And those are now out of the box enabled so that I can ask for them to be injected into a running pod. And there you have it. Full container runtime. I can podman build, I can podman run, I can podman compose up. If you use local stack, I can run podman listening on a local socket. I can run local stack now. If you're an Ansible developer, you can run a full Ansible execution environment. This is going to be a game changer for cloud-based IDEs running on OpenShift. And like I said at the beginning, it is something I'm very excited about. So stay tuned for more. Cheers.